Now's my opportunity to introduce the final speaker, and this is a speaker that I personally been looking forward to hearing from. As most of you know, I started this job a little over 2 years ago, and everyone who takes a new job, as I did, sets a goal for themselves to be as effective in that job as they possibly can be. And one of the things you do when you're trying to figure out how to do your job well, especially a new job, is you look around to the other people who do the job that you do to try to learn from them. Unfortunately for me, in a country with 300 million people, there are 50 who have the same job that I have. But even so, it didn't take long for me when I met my fellow state commissioners of education at conferences and so forth, for me to identify Tony Bennett as someone that is really good at the job of being a state school chief, and therefore someone that I felt I could learn a lot from, have learned a lot from, and would do my best to emulate. Tony's background, he's done it all. He was a high school science teacher, basketball coach. He went on to roles in school and district administration, and he was elected, as we heard earlier today, Indiana's public superintendent of instruction, superintendent of public instruction in 2009. That's an elected office in Indiana. During his time in that office, Tony tackled a number of reform initiatives, many of which we've heard about today: grading schools, more accountability pieces, early childhood, teacher quality, and that very bold agenda done in cooperation with his governor and Tony's sort of no-nonsense approach to doing these things made him a national leader and has made him a national leader in the school reform community. And in 2011, our friends at the Fordham Institute named him an education reform idol. I thought that was, I don't know if they gave you a statue for that, Tony, or whatever, but Tony's reward for being a major force in school reform in the nation is that when he ran for re-election here last year, a massive campaign was launched against him, and to the dismay of many of us, and this was about the only electoral race that I paid any attention to on election night, Tony was unseated as commissioner in Indiana to the great detriment, I would say, of the families of the Hoosier state. But someone with the talent and vision of Tony Bennett doesn't stay unemployed for long. So he was quickly scooped up by the state of Florida and was named commissioner there earlier this year. It gives me great pleasure, personally and professionally, to welcome to the stage my friend and colleague, Tony Bennett.
Good afternoon. I am going to speak to you from a number of perspectives. One is obviously as a state school chief. One is as a father. A little background, I am the father of 4. A set of 27-year-old triplets, Tony, Patricia, and Katie. Katie is a child who is learning disabled, severely learning disabled, incredibly dyslexic. And earlier this year, when I was at an event, I got the phone call that every father dreams of having from his dyslexic daughter. And that was to say, Dad, I just became a registered nurse. I just passed my nursing boards. And like all dads, I cried, and very proud of Katie, very proud of all of our children. I'm also going to speak to you as a public educator, and I am going to speak to you as both a success and as a failure. I heard someone ask about policy wonks. I am not a policy wonk. I am a school guy, a public school guy. Since 1990, I served public school children as a teacher, as a principal, assistant superintendent, superintendent. And I want to be very fair when I say that. I was an enigma, an anomaly in my profession in that I believed in these reforms as a public school administrator. Many of my colleagues couldn't understand that. So I am going to talk to you from the heart, and I will take any question you can throw at me. Because as Steve mentioned, I went through some pretty tough times in the last year. Okay, I faced some pretty tough audiences. And I will tell you point blank how and why and what happened in Indiana regarding an election. And I'm not ashamed of that. Okay, as Steve said, I'm pretty no-nonsense. So I'm going to probably, one, I hope to tug at your heartstrings a bit. I hope to make you think a little bit. And I hope that you leave here today thanking Governor LePage and Steve Bowen, because this is sorely needed. I believe our incredible country was found on disagreement. We didn't come together as the wonderful place that we all enjoy the freedoms we have because we all agreed on everything. This great country was built because people disagreed. And this is a great debate. It's about time we debate education. So I am not offended if you disagree. I just ask when you ask questions, be respectful. I'll be respectful back. So let me start with a very brief anecdote that happened to me in 2009. 2009, I was a newly elected superintendent of public instruction in the state of Indiana. I was very proud of myself. My wife was very proud of me. My kids didn't care. So I was asked to speak at the Future Business Leaders of America conference in Indianapolis, Indiana. State FBLA. Showed up at 7 o'clock to be the breakfast speaker for the Future Business Leaders. That's how you know you're a rookie politician. 7 a.m. So I came in and I gave them my best fire and brimstone speech. This is international competition, kids. You've got to answer the call. Your international competitors are wanting to kick your rears. They want to get in Notre Dame. They want to get in Purdue. They're going to keep you out of those seats. And I was on a roll. I left, and about 8 months later, something really strange happened. I was invited to the next year to speak to the Future Business Leaders of America. Now, I did get a promotion. I was the lunch speaker. So I show up, and on the way, I'll never forget this day, on the way, I flip a contact. Now, if I didn't have my contacts in, I could barely see the front row here. So I flip a contact out, and I'm not feeling really good about, having to go in and blink and try to do this. And this young man walks up to me, and he says, "Dr. Bennett, do you remember me?" And I want to look at him and say, "Pal, I don't have any contacts in. I can't see you." But I didn't. I said, "Well, I think you're there was this big continuous loop thing, and I said, I think you're one of the officers here." And he stuck his hand out very confidently, and he says, "My name is William Zhao, Z-H-A-O, and Dr. Bennett, can I give you a gift?" Now, I did, because understand, as Steve said, we did a lot of things with Governor Daniels over 4 years. And I wanted to ask old William, does it tick? And if they're like cookies that your mom baked, should I have maybe a staffer eat them first? So he goes over to his briefcase, and he gets out this red, shiny book. It's got a bright, shiny cover. It's a little paperback book. And the title of the book is this: Fierce Urgency, Education and Future Global Competition Through the Eyes of a Chinese Immigrant. And the author was a young man by the name of William Zhao. Now, this is a self-edited book. So I want you to understand that. And William inscribed on the front cover of that book, "To Dr. Bennett, you inspired me to write this book." It sits on my nightstand today. It's probably one of the prized possessions I got in 4 years of office. Very proud of it. William and I correspond regularly. He is a Wells Scholar at IU. But William makes a very pointed statement early in that book. The statement, and I'm going to paraphrase, is this: William spent the first 10 years of his life in China, went on and moved to Canada, and then moved to Kokomo, Indiana, just right in the almost the dead center of our state. William says he knows this. He said, education's kind of like a chess game. And he said, my native country is playing chess to win, and from my experience here, I fear we're playing chess not to lose. And he says, I know my native country, they want to beat us. And that comment, that young man, has helped me maintain a focus on education reform. And I want to share that with you today. I want to share a little bit about what we did in Indiana, what we've tried to do, and then we'll take some questions and we'll have a pretty robust discussion. Let's see now. There we go. Let me start with what I believe to be the mission of every school in the United States. Every school in the United States. Local control, and I want to say something. When someone asked about local control, I was former public school superintendent. I loved local control. I have to tell you, there were certain school board meetings when I looked to my right and looked to my left, and I thought maybe the locals weren't so good. But I did like local control. But I believe in its heart, if you think about it, in a federalist system of education, and that's what we have, not a nationalized system of education, in a federalist system of education where states control the education, the academic and achievement and career preparation of all students should be the best in the United States and on par with any country around the world. If as each state pursued that, and the locals pursued that to help each state do that, I think we would be pretty far ahead in a federalist system of education. So our message should be that everything we do should be student-focused, success-driven, and must build on a coalition of support for comprehensive reform. I want to say this. Coalition of support, that's where I failed. Dismal failure. Okay, I'm not ashamed to tell you that, and I'll explain that shortly. So, the guiding principles, and here are the successes and the failures mixed into one slide, ladies and gentlemen. The success is really, these guiding principles are the principles that lead the most successful nation in the world to be the success that it is. Our national economy, our system of government is based on competition, freedom, and accountability. Competition, freedom, and accountability. And I am here to tell you the failure of the education reform system rests on the fact that we have adopted too closely to that rhetoric. Between 2009 and 2012, Leslie Heiner heard me 100 times. She could probably give parts of this speech. She heard me say, we must be competitive. Schools must compete for children. Schools must compete to get better. She heard me say, local school districts should have all the freedoms of charter schools if they're going to be successful. If we expect them to compete with charter schools, we got to give them the same freedom as charter schools. It's not fair to grade traditional public schools on a different playing field than our charter schools or our private schools. And she heard me say you got to hold everybody accountable. Teachers, administrators, children, parents, school districts, schools. Everyone should be accountable. That message doesn't resonate. That message does not resonate. Matter of fact, it resonated to the tune of about 1.5 million people voting against me. Here's the message that does resonate. School choice is a social justice issue. It's not a competitive issue. It's a social justice issue. I believe that in my heart. Now, many of you out there look at Tony Bennett. I know some of you have probably taken the pains when you saw I was speaking today to Google Tony Bennett. You probably read some pretty nasty things. I'm okay with that. Here's the one thing I would ask that you try to keep in mind for the next 15 or so minutes. This is in my heart. I am not out to destroy public education. My daughter, one of the triplets, has been a public school teacher in a Title I public school in southern Indiana for a year, and I am thrilled she chose that profession. My wife is a longtime public school educator. This is not about trying to kill public education. I believe in my heart school choice is a social justice issue, and let me explain why. I make a very nice salary. My wife makes a very nice salary. So let's move back the clock 15 years, and the Bennett triplets were 12. Their baby sister is 8, and we moved to Tallahassee. What do you think we do? What do? We get in our car, we drive around Tallahassee, we find the neighborhood that we think best suits the school our children need to go to. Find a neighborhood where we think it's a good school for the Bennett kids. And if we don't find one of those, then what do? We pay tuition. Why doesn't a poor minority, single mom have that same opportunity. It's not about competition. That's about giving her kid the same opportunity as my kids. That's a winning argument. And you know what? That argument resonates with the middle class. Try telling the middle class, try going to Carmel, Indiana, suburban America, one of the best places to live in the United States, that their schools aren't that good and they need to compete. That doesn't resonate. Freedom. What do we think of when we talk about freedom? The deregulation word, right? We all know what that means. Go tell folks that you're going to level the playing field. Tell folks you're going to level the playing field. And accountability, this is a place that frankly got me in trouble with my own constituents. Patricia and I had many conversations. When we went to grading schools A through F, guess what happened to our charter schools? Many of them were Fs. And they were mad. And I said, get better. I don't want more schools. I want more quality schools in Indiana. Those guiding principles, if spoken right, help you build that coalition of support. It also takes away the personal attacks. Now, I've spent a little time with Governor LePage. I believe in his heart he wants what's best for every child of Maine. But when he conveys that, he has to win the hearts and minds of every citizen in Maine without splitting the populations apart. I suggest to you, if you looked at my election returns in 2012, compared to the rest of the ticket, I did pretty well in two areas, downtown Indianapolis and downtown Gary. Their parents got it. Didn't win them. I minimized my losses. Their parents got it. Go to Carmel, they didn't get it. It's about building that coalition of support. It's about making sure we have the rhetoric of education right. So how do we get this fierce urgency that William Zhao talked about? How do we get the fierce urgency? So I just look at where we rank in the United States. And again, I am not a glass half empty guy, not a glass half full guy. I'm just kind of a glass of water guy. But I drink whatever I want out of that glass, and then we, go to the next one. But these are the obvious things that we saw in the Exxon Mobil commercials, all the stuff that we've seen. There's nothing new there. Here's where I come in as a public school educator. Our kids are better than that. Our kids deserve better than that. America deserves better than that. America needs better than that. Doesn't mean we're terrible. It means we are not as good as we should be. That's the question. How do we get as good as we should be? So, we said we've got to sustain reform, and to do that, we have to stay on offense. This was the hardest part of the job, and again, it's part of the failure. We created and implemented a very robust communications plan. I did town hall meetings like this and met with over 10,000 Indiana teachers. Those were not fun meetings. Those were not fun meetings. But you know what, Governor? You can't govern from the State House. And if you're going to drive an agenda, you have to go out and be willing to face the public about what you believe in your heart. I got emails from teachers saying, Dr. Bennett, I totally disagree with you, but thank you for coming and standing up and saying what you believe. Thank you for facing us and facing the hard questions. Don't believe you. I don't like you. I'm not going to vote for you. Those were pretty good days. And again, be everywhere. Be online. Be in person. So the issue of making sure you communicate your intentions is very important. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the actual comprehensive education reform that we did in Indiana. We did a lot of it straight off of Florida. In many instances, we deviated from Florida because of the Indiana landscape. I want to say that much of what we did was empower the locals, because as a former public school superintendent, I kept saying, if the state would just get the policies right, I believe we could operate our districts better. So I want to talk a little bit about, as we think about competition, freedom, and accountability, we did allow more charter school options with the understanding they were going to get A through F grades on the same tests the same way everyone else did. We do have a pure voucher program in Indiana. We enacted a means-based voucher program in Indiana. Means tested that a child whose parents are at free and reduced lunch or below, 90% of the state's tuition support goes with that child to an accredited private school. If you are between 100% and 150%, that family gets 50% of the state tuition support. It's totally means tested. Again, accredited private school. And we grade our schools A through F. And by the way, as I think it was Matt mentioned, Indiana has this little sacred rite that's going on this month. If you don't know, it's called high school basketball. And the private schools want to play in that tournament. So they all said, in order to belong to the Indiana High School Athletic Association, we're going to take the tests. So every private school, if they take one voucher, the entire school is tested. You know what that allowed us to do? Allowed us to grade our private schools A through F. Parents could then make an informed choice. Charter schools, same thing. Traditional publics, same thing. We talk about freedom, and I really want to talk about flexibility. Indiana went through a very difficult discussion with our state teacher unions around the flexibility of collective bargaining. I am the son of a union electrician. It does not play in the Bennett house that collective bargaining rights should be abolished. Okay? We did not abolish collective bargaining in Indiana. We did limit collective bargaining to wages and benefits. And let me explain why. I'm going to give you one very brief example. If Governor LePage and I were hired to teach in Fort Wayne Community Schools in 2006, and in 2010, Fort Wayne Community Schools had to decide that they had to reduce staff, and in the economy we had, I think that was a pretty reasonable thing that was probably happening around our country. You know how Fort Wayne Community Schools had it written into their collective bargaining contract on who got to stay and who got to go? They added up the last 4 digits of Paul LePage's Social Security number and the last 4 digits of my Social Security number, and the person with the highest sum got to stay. Is that good for kids? Is that good for kids? Now, you know, there were other districts that were a little different. Some flipped coins. Some drew straws. We had a couple that cast dice. One said it was your birthday. And one district said, we don't care how you do it. It has to be totally by chance. Can't be based on performance. So the collective bargaining reform was run through that lens of language that puts children first. Should not get in the way of a local superintendent running a district so that he can deliver instruction. We did deregulate local schools. We abolished seat time requirements. We allowed alternatives to getting PE credit. We changed our textbook adoption law so that a laptop computer was defined as a textbook and technology could be intentionally integrated into our schools. And we empowered school leaders. We empowered school leaders. We said, we're going to grade you. We got to empower you. We empowered them by, according to Bellwether Education Partners, the #1 rated educator effectiveness legislation in the United States. It is totally locally driven. In Indiana, you will find the TAP program, you will find Marzano's eye observation, you'll find a program that the state put together, and you know what? They're all taking bits and pieces and they're posting them on a website and they're all getting together and saying, this is what works well. TAP works great. All locally driven. So we did have annual evaluations. We did have tenure reforms. We did put in, and I firmly, in my heart, believe in the Common Core state standards. I'm sorry to say that Indiana is considering pulling out. I think it's a grave mistake. We did do something that very few states had ever done, is we went in and intervened with low-performing schools. And when I say intervened, we took the low-performing school away from the district. After 6 consecutive years of F, we walked in and pulled the school away from the district and turned it over to someone else to run. It was very difficult work. I want to share with you that the 2 communities that we did it in were the 2 places that appreciated our work the most, Gary and Indianapolis. And the last thing we said is we expect results. We're going to measure. We're going to measure. And we're not just going to measure the state test scores. We're going to measure everything. Now, there is a little bit of a reaction when you do this. And if you don't see, that is Tony Bennett and Mitch Daniels. I'm going to tell you, I am not proud of this. I put this up here to you as is the sign of my great failure. Because as pure as my heart is in pushing a very comprehensive education reform agenda, it pains me to have to look at a picture of me in a Darth Vader outfit. Now, I have to say, if you're a Star Wars geek, Matt, Darth Vader at the end did have redeeming qualities. The Emperor, not so much. I always remind Governor Daniels of that. So we'll move on. So let's talk about these reforms in the vein of local control. And this is a very important piece for school administrators, the governor, and the commissioner. Because this goes to the role of the state education agency, the SEA as we like to call it. And I think if you're going to do things and you're going to do them right, you've got to get the government's role right. And I think for far too long, districts and state education agencies have had it backwards. The state education agency pretends like it's the biggest school district in the state. We're going to tell you how to do, what to do it, when to do it. We're going to make you report it 1,000 times, even if we only need it once. So I believe this. The role of the state in education, in a federalist system of education, is to set the expectations for local schools. Set the expectations. And then hold everyone accountable to meeting the expectations. In the middle, the what to do, that's local control. That's local control. We should hand that over to the locals. And for far too long, the state didn't have any expectations. The state didn't hold anyone accountable. So you know what the state did? It just told you what to do. The right approach is for the state to tell you what we expect. The state is to focus on holding you accountable for those expectations, A, B, C, D, F, whatever you do. And then I believe the state needs to get the hell out of the way and let you do your job. That's the best thing the state can do. Besides acting as a clearinghouse for the best practices. The one thing we hear from districts in Florida and in Indiana is, tell us what you know works best. Especially in our rural districts that maybe don't have the ability to go out and research those things. Tell us what works best. But let us make the decision. So I'm going to make the closing argument for comprehensive education reform. I can't do it any better than what maybe Matt did and Patricia did and Mike, you did so eloquently with those headlines. Florida ranks first in the nation in AP participation. I want you to think about that in a majority-minority state. Florida has over 50% of its high school graduates taking AP classes. Now, I don't know whether you know this or not, but simply taking an AP class improves your chances of graduating from college. Simply exposing a child to that rigor improves their chances. Florida ranks first in the nation for teacher quality, according to NCTQ. And Education Week recently ranked Florida sixth in the nation for the quality of its education system, an improvement from 11th place in 2012. The thing that has not been talked about today is the recent fourth grade reading, international reading assessment that's called PEARLS. I think that's an incredible graphic. What that graphic tells us is that Florida is number 2 in the world in this assessment. Number 2 in the world. Not number 2 in the nation, number 2 in the world behind Hong Kong. The United States as a whole is down a few rungs. Indiana, where we adopted the Florida model, and I want to be very honest, I want to give the folks in Florida a tremendous amount of credit. Patricia came in, and she held my hand through 2 years of this work. When we started, I actually had a scoreboard outside my office in the State House. It looked just like a basketball scoreboard because that's what Hoosiers do. And we said this, 90% of our students will pass the state assessment, 25% of our students will graduate with advanced placement, international baccalaureate, or dual credit, or an industry certification, and 90% will graduate from high school with a meaningful high school diploma. Those were our 3 measurements. And we built everything around those 3 measurements. Our graduation rate in 4 years improved by almost 8%. Indiana is now graduating 85.7%. It's the highest graduation rate in the state's history, and that is using the federal graduation calculation. There's no gaming there. 14% of the students are earning AP credits before graduation. That's just AP. That's not IB. That's not dual credit. And that's not industry certifications. That's just AP. It's up 4%. Indiana has the largest jump in AP performance in 4 years. Florida leads the nation in AP performance for the most part. When you put participation and success together, in the last 4 years, Indiana has had the biggest improvements. And we went over 7% improvement in our state's assessment in 4 years. 71.3% passed both math and English on our state assessment. What gets measured gets treasured. That's very simple. We actually had school boards that would call and say, would you mind, can we adopt those goals for our school district? It was good. So what I am here to tell you, this is tough work. This is tough work. Is it all the right thing? I don't know. I can't sit here and tell you today that more charter schools, more vouchers is the perfect answer. I don't think, as Matt said, I don't think it's a panacea. I believe what you have to think about is changing your system, changing the discussion, changing the culture so that the thing that the state invests the most in becomes the thing that is the most important. We must chase our actions with our rhetoric. And we must chase our rhetoric with our actions. And if our rhetoric is education's important, have the debate. Have the debate as a state. I ask that you do this. As a warrior and victim of this debate, I ask that you do this. And I ask you to do this on behalf of Governor LePage. Governor, I ask this state to have this debate with you and never doubt your integrity. Never doubt that in your heart is with Maine children. You may disagree with the policy, doesn't mean the man is anti-public education. And Governor LePage, I ask that you challenge your population to come to you with creative solutions so we don't get into the habit of just referring to them as the status quo. I want you to think about that. I used to say to our superintendents and principals, just don't say no. Bring me something. Bring me something. And I believe if you do that in Maine, I believe that if you come together as a state and you talk about some of the Florida reform model, talk about what Kate Walsh talked about with teacher preparation, talk about aspects of school choice, and you do it in a vein of respect, and you do it through the lens that the kids are the most important thing we're talking about, you'll get to the right answers. You'll get to the right answers. And that's what I ask you to do. That's my challenge to you. And I hope that you do that, and I hope the children of Maine become the huge beneficiaries of your work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over and take any questions you may have.
Who has a question? Oh, come on. Anyone?
People are hungry.
Apparently. They agreed with everything you had to say.
I know better than that.
Going once?
Here we go,
All
right down here in front.
Oh.
It just always takes one person to break the ice. And believe me, folks, there's nothing you can ask that I haven't been asked. So don't be shy. Please.
Hi, what role do you think the teachers union can play in help bringing about some of these reforms?
Great question. Thank you for asking. Again, it was a place where I failed. I think the number one thing that the MEA can do is come to the table armed with creative solutions. Come to the table armed with creative solutions. There is this belief among those of us who are like me that the teachers union will fight you every step of the way. And I'm going to tell you, if we paint them as the status quo and try to render them irrelevant, that's how they'll behave. If they come to the table and say, we have a solution, and let me give you a couple examples. When we got into this issue of educator effectiveness, I was one of those guys that said, state's got to have a model. Everybody has to adopt the model because that's the right thing to do. That's the only way we're going to get implementation with fidelity. And our teacher union came forward and said, we believe very strongly that our teachers should be evaluated annually. But here's the deal. Let us work with our locals to figure out what the evaluation looks like. So what the state did in response, as opposed to prescribing what the evaluation system was, we set very simple guidelines and guardrails, and we said, locals do it, and we're going to measure you. So I think, one, it's my charge to the teacher union on this, come to the table with solutions. Come to the table in good faith with solutions. That's the way to crack it, and I think that's the role.
Yes, it's been published that the Florida Department of Education, 31% of their charter schools were not counted in their statistics, and 21 of them closed. Can you answer that?
Yeah, and again, I've been around. One of the things I'm going to have to beg is a little bit throw myself at your mercy because I've been in Florida now for 8 weeks. So I have mastered my way from my house to the DOE building. But I think the answer to the question, and I may actually ask Matt or Patricia on this, I think part of it is Florida has a requirement on what we refer to as N size. So if the charter school doesn't have enough students to measure, there is the fear that because of that small number, those students can become identified under FERPA. So Florida actually excluded those schools from the calculation because of N size. That's the best answer I have because we did study that, and frankly, it was not an issue in Indiana because we didn't have any that small.
We have one more question, I believe.
Okay.
Yep, one more question right here.
And then I'll give it. Then we'll let Steve ask the last one.
As a superintendent, it was shown in 2010 that for every 100 educators in the state of Maine in a school, in the school system, that there was about 114 non-educators, things like superintendents, administrative personnel. How do you think that huge disparity between people that are actually in the classroom and then the administrative personnel, fits into what you're talking about putting the students first.
Wow, great question. A very insightful question, because the answer is putting together two things that we as states have done a terrible job of doing. And that is marrying fiscal policy and education policy. You know, I believe that really one of the best things we can do, and I'll give you an example. In my former life as a district superintendent, our school board got their health insurance paid for their family all but $1. It was about an $18,000 benefit for 7 people. I used to ask them, why don't you get it at your work? That took money away from our classrooms, as does what you're talking about, top-heavy administration or non-instructional staff. So I think what we have to do and I'll tell you, I'm a guy who is all about grades, and I would really love to see a fiscal efficiency grade. I would love to come up with a valid way of saying, okay, this school academically has performed here, and financially this school district has performed here, and cause the public discussion between those two. I think that's the only way we get to that discussion that you're talking about, is at that level of transparency and reporting, so that the folks who really make the decisions in the community are forced to answer those questions about staffing ratios when it comes to administrative staff and non-instructional staff. But one of our big challenges in Indiana was always to drive as many dollars to the classroom as possible. And if that meant consolidating services, that meant consolidating services. And we have a lot of districts now consolidating services, and frankly, they kind of like it better. And it has saved them personnel costs in the non-instructional revenue pool. Steve. Well, you know, Steve, it's a great question, because here's the benefit of coming to Florida, is that Florida did this over, what, Patricia, 13 years? So they've done a lot of these things over 13 years. And here's the downfall to doing this over that period of time. Sometimes a reform you pass in year 10 doesn't fit very well with a reform you passed in year 2. You know, one of the benefits we had in Indiana, when people used to say this was all too much, too fast, it was done over 2 years, well, we had to make sure it all fit together very nicely. Let me give you an example, Steve, because I think this is a great discussion point to leave on. Let's talk about educator effectiveness. I am a person who, in my heart, believes that the best way to have educator effectiveness, I want to be on record as saying I do not advocate for publishing teachers' evaluations and teachers' growth scores, value-added scores individually in newspapers. I am 100% against that. I just think it's wrong. But here's what I do like. Why don't we come up with a way to have the discussion, and this is what I would love to do in Florida, to answer your question directly, where we can take a look at the percentage of highly effective teachers, teachers who need improvement, and ineffective teachers, and correlate that to the school grade. Now think about that. If you're using a growth indicator, doesn't it just make sense to the average Maine citizen that an A school has mostly highly effective and effective teachers? Doesn't that just make sense? I always say, does it pass the Dick Bennett test? That's my dad, the electrician. My dad would say that's an A district. They probably got a lot of pretty good teachers. Does it make sense that if I took you to Gary, where Gary Roosevelt High School had 6 years of failure, F, that 99% of their teachers were effective or above? Does that make sense to you? So, Steve, I think my goal in Florida is, how do we bring these reforms together so they all fit together nicely? And so we don't have to be so prescriptive, and through very simple reporting mechanisms, there's fidelity of implementation and fidelity of data. Folks, thank you very much, and good luck on your journey.